So thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions, Rob? So we'll move on to RJ Cervantes with the California Trucking Association. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm RJ Cervantes, the Director of Legislative Affairs for the California Trucking Association, and I want to thank you for allowing me to come here today and make a few remarks about our perspective. Like Rob, we're a little unique to this conversation because we're the users and customers of our system and our planning folks and friends around the state. So we appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments. Trucking is currently and is projected to remain the primary mode of goods movement in California. Together, the 33,000 California-based trucking companies and the 622,000 people employed by them haul nearly 90% of the manufactured tonnage in California. 80% of California's communities depend exclusively on trucks to move their goods. One of the greatest risks to our companies and to our employees, without a doubt, is the deterioration of our roadways. California companies are spending millions of dollars in costs associated with truck maintenance and losing hundreds of millions of dollars due to lost productivity related to poor infrastructure conditions and congestion. Nationally, on the interstate system alone, congestion is costing the trucking industry over $9 billion on an annual basis, and we are wasting more than 141 million hours sitting in traffic. That's the equivalent of 51,000 truckers just sitting idle for a full working year. The longer we wait to address this issue, the more our productivity suffers. It's clear that critical action is needed now. We're happy to participate in this conversation with you all to find a sustainable solution. As the source of over $2 billion in annual transportation-related revenues, the trucking industry will be a significant participant in the discussions on how to fund the roadway system. And we look forward to communicating our concerns and some of our proposals to you. In our view, we must start this conversation by examining where our existing sources of revenue are going, identifying cost savings in our infrastructure project delivery streams, and by repaying any outstanding loans that were made from transportation funding accounts. Out of the $2 billion that California trucking companies are currently paying, over $1 billion of that figure is made up of truck weight fees, which are currently being used, as was discussed today, to cover debt service costs on bonds. We strongly urge the return of the truck weight fees back for their intended purpose, which is to help fund the maintenance and rehabilitation of our highways. And we want to thank Member Linder, Assemblymember Alejo, and Assemblymember Perea for their leadership on that issue and returning our truck weight fees. However, we also understand that after securing our existing sources of revenue, we need to think strategically about the potential for new revenue sources to be assessed on highway users. To that point, our association has 5 key principles when approaching new revenue streams. First, any new revenue generated from the trucking industry should be reinvested back into the roadway goods movement related projects. Second, any new revenue should be based solely on the use of the system itself. We need a true user fee. Third, the revenue stream should be collected on the millions of out-of-state commercial vehicles who are utilizing California's highways. It shouldn't just only be based on California-based truckers alone. We need to capture the revenue from the out-of-state folks as well. Fourth, that the revenue stream is inexpensive and simple for government to administer and without imposing excessive administrative burdens on trucking companies. And finally, we recognize that the revenue stream should be reasonable and not jeopardize trucking's leadership role in the goods movement sector. Today, the only option that meets these priorities for the trucking industry is the continued use of the diesel excise tax. We continue to see the diesel excise tax as the most viable option to raise revenues from our industry. It's easy to administer, it's based on use, and we can capture it from out-of-state sources. Also, according to modeling done for the California Air Resources Board Mobile Sources emissions tracking, unlike gasoline consumption, diesel consumption rates will stay constant for the foreseeable future. And still, Mr. Chairman, we still see the diesel excise tax as a viable option from our industry. But after we find additional sources of revenue, where should we invest those dollars? I'd like to highlight the top two areas of investments that, along with maintenance and rehab of our streets and highways, the trucking industry views as a critical means to help our industry operate more efficiently. First, we need to invest in the major freight bottleneck points that are harming efficient movement on our roads and leading to millions of dollars in lost productivity. According to the American Transportation Research Institute, California now has 7 of the top 55 freight bottlenecks in the country, which is leading to hundreds of millions of dollars in lost productivity from our companies. Second, state and local collaboration on last-mile connector investments are absolutely critical to ensure that we are making the greatest use of our freight hubs throughout the state. Alleviating congestion at the points of entry to our ports is one of the best investments we can make to boost California's competitiveness and attract cargo shipments. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll wrap up with that, but I appreciate, again, the opportunity to speak today and look forward to assisting you and the committee moving forward.
Thank you so much. Any questions of the panel? Mr. Chu first, and then Mr. O'Donnell. Mr. Chu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me first start by thanking all of today's panelists for helping to document the transportation crisis that our state is in, the fact that we have not in generations invested as we should, the fact that today's potholes we know are going to become tomorrow's sinkholes, and we need to dig ourselves out of these holes. And I think I speak for probably every member of this committee about being absolutely committed to fixing our local roads, our state highways, and our bridges. That being said, I want to suggest, and I do hope that this special session will much more explicitly address public transportation funding. In fact, as I was driving here this morning, sitting in gridlock, my guess is most of us who came to this meeting were stuck in gridlock. I don't think we can just fill potholes. We have to get more folks out of our cars onto public transportation and other alternative transit modes. And I represent a city where our transit system, as Mr. Heminger said, is 100 years old, and it's late 40% of the time. Now, a number of you have said that we need to invest in public transportation. I heard from the MTC presentation, Mr. Heminger, you're saying $20 billion in potholes is what the investment is that we need, and $20 billion in transit repairs is what we need. I heard from the League of, from CSAC that voters support revenues that are dedicated to transportation. My question to the panel, any of you have a good sense of what you think the right mix of investments in transportation versus roads, streets, bridges, and others ought to be? What would help optimize, if we have limited resources, optimize moving transportation in a way that's going to work for our workers, work for our families, work for our entire state?
Mr. Chu, I will say, and you put your finger on it, talking about the 3 legs of the stool, okay, federal, state, local. Historically, the state has never been a big player in transit capital repair. It's never been a big player in transit operations either, for that matter, with the exception of TDA, which is back when Ronald Reagan was governor, even a couple of governors before. The federal government has been the big partner with local funds in taking care of our transit capital needs. But I'm reminded of something Mr. Lapsley said, and it really struck me. In this recent economic expansion, 60% of the jobs are in the Bay Area. And I venture to say a lot of them are on the 101 corridor in and out of Silicon Valley. That's not a local matter. That's a matter of statewide importance. And the fact is, if we don't improve our public transit networks and we start by taking care of them so they don't fall apart, we run the real risk of killing the golden goose that lays the golden eggs. So I do think there is a case to be made for a stronger state role in public transit, in taking care of the transit capital assets that are the lifeblood of the regional economies, not just in the Bay Area, but in LA and San Diego and Sacramento. Those aren't just local issues. Those metropolitan economies generate the income tax and the sales tax and the other revenue that floats the boat around here. And I think transit is going to be a bigger and bigger piece of their mobility portfolio.
I would give you an example of somebody gave me a map the other day that was from the Hollywood Reporter. and it showed the we didn't do this. They did it themselves. It was the opening of the exposition line, which parallels the 10 freeway. And they highlighted all of the companies that are near the exposition lines. There's Sony Pictures, HBO, Yahoo, all these, some tech companies, some old established movie studios are right off the exposition line. So we didn't do it as a marketing piece. The Hollywood Reporter did it to highlight how transit is will now be able to access major employers in our region. So, the 10 freeway will still be the core artery in that region. The 405 will still be the major artery on the west side. Taking it down through Long Beach will still be the major artery. Those, the street and road network, the highway network will still be the primary way that people get around Los Angeles County. So it's a big part of the needs in our region. But what we are seeing is that transit is becoming something that people will use. It is becoming a part of the solution. And we need to make sure that those systems stay in good working order, the cars stay clean, the cars stay in good shape, the power systems still work. Those things are key to making sure that those systems are still available to people.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Thank you. And I appreciate some of the comments there, especially the ones at the end, which indicated that goods movement has to be a priority throughout this exercise. As someone who represents the two ports, Long Beach and Los Angeles, I can't underscore the importance of that. But also, as we look at when I drive through LA, when I drive through the 5, when I go up north, up the 5, which I've done recently, and the 101, what seems to be happening in LA to me is it seems to be rather rail-centric. Not necessarily like Orange County, which I think tends to be car-centric. I think we have the two extremes almost, I think, as you drive through the two communities. But the 5 has to be addressed through LA, and I think the state has to play a role in that too, make sure that the county does address the issues on the 5 and the 101, because that's the trucks go through there. And they're in pretty bad shape. If you go through some of those corridors on the 5 and the 101, quite frankly, I don't know if they've ever been changed since they were built. I don't think they've ever been expanded. I'll let you speak to that, but that's something I notice as I drive up and down the 5 and the 101. All the rail in the world isn't going to change those dynamics of those roadways, be it the state they're in, and the fact that they probably do need to hold more capacity.
And on the there's two segments of the 5 that were partially funded by the sales tax Measure R, but those are actually good examples of where we've had a good partnership with the state. Mm-hmm. We're making improvements to the 5 in the San Fernando Valley, from the 134 to the 170. That includes a carpool lane and a widening. Those are funded from Proposition 1B, but we also contribute some sales tax. They're being delivered by Caltrans. We have the same scenario on the I-5 coming from the Orange County line to the 605. But really what we're doing is almost catching up to what Orange County did, because Orange County widened that freeway long before we ever got to it. There's still a chunk of that that's in between the 605 all the way up to the 134 that still needs some attention.
Correct.
And so those are significant needs, not to mention the needs of the 710 corridor coming out of the ports through your district up to the rail yards and the distribution centers going east. Those are significant capital improvements, and there's no funding for those on the horizon. I mean, we're here talking about how do we maintain the system in a state of good repair. We're not talking about how are we going to fund some of those major freeway projects going forward, and that's a real challenge. A sales tax could get at some of that, but it's not going to be able to fund all of the needs in our county. And as we go forward with the sales tax we're looking at now with Measure, an extension of a new tax, the mix of highway and transit projects is going to be something that's debated, and it will be a key issue. But there are a number of highway projects in our county that certainly need attention.
Great, thank you. And I think also, when you look at the Orange County, LA County dynamic between the two districts, we need to make sure that our Caltrans districts are communicating, because we've had some dynamics down there where maybe that did happen. Either way, we just need to make sure it does happen.
It's been a challenge. We've had some good examples of where it hasn't happened, but we've done a lot of work recently, particularly through the work of the CEOs of the county transportation commissions, to address a lot of those issues. I mean, we're not out of the woods. Orange County's talking about a significant widening of the 405.
Correct.
And we haven't sorted out what we're going to do on the LA County portion of that. So there are still challenges ahead.
Thank you.
Well, I guess one of the things that we really have to acknowledge is right at this point in time is the self-help counties, that they're putting $4 billion a year into this effort to partner with the state. And we've got to thank the voters for actually acknowledging that and putting that out there. I know that without that effort, we'd be even worse. And also in the toll authorities also that are putting a big investment into transit, into roads, and moving forward. But one of the things I think, Mr. Linder, as your question was about efficiencies, if we were to create with Mr. Cervantes how many hours those trucks are idling, sitting, going forward, and dedicating, goods movement out of our ports is imperative to work forward, moving forward in the next decade for sure. But going forward, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming up today. We're going to go ahead and have anybody that would like to public comment. And you may have a question, so I'd stay there for a second if you would, please. If any of the members of the audience would like to come up and address or ask any questions of the panel. I know they're good, but there's got to be a question or a comment. Oh, those people are leaving. Here we go. State your name and who you represent, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Robinson with the California Transit Association. Since no one else got up, I guess I'll say something. I very much appreciate the comments of Mr. Chu, Mr. Heminger, Mr. Turner, just talking about the need that we find kind of a multimodal solution to addressing our state's transportation infrastructure needs. It's been, I think, widely pointed out between today's hearing and the hearing we had last week of the shortfall that we're facing on our local streets and roads and our state highways. Our transit systems have about a $70 billion shortfall statewide, so I think we've got to look at that challenge. There isn't much in the way of state funding coming to transit. It's about $500 million a year if you count cap and trade. That's for approximately 187 systems, so you spread that out and it starts getting pretty small down to those smaller systems in those areas we hope to grow. Another thing, I think, this issue of congestion and how that helps good movement if we improve throughput on our freeways. One way to do that is to provide alternatives in those corridors. We're starting to see it on the 101 in Silicon Valley that was mentioned by Mr. Heminger. Caltrain ridership is just exploding on that system as people get tired of sitting in their cars and need to find those alternatives. And I think it's important that we look at ways to address that statewide in hopes of finding a comprehensive solution to this ongoing transportation needs problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other? Mr. Pelot, did you have something to say? So it looks like we have no remaining questions, and I want to thank the panel again for your informative information. It was really helpful today. To the members of the committee, as you can see, we have our work cut out for us. I think the governor has told us that the challenge is $5.7 billion, and I think we need to get as close to that amount of money as we can. And I'm looking forward to working with each and every one of you to make that happen this year. And I'm confident we can get there because we have to go big or go home. This is the year. So thank you so very much for your attention, and we are adjourned.